My name is Brent White. I'm going to talk to you about hacking web apps, and this is more of an intro. Uh, so if this is something that you're wanting to get into, you're interested in, testing the security posture of your web app that you've created, or for your company, or for your dev team, uh, this is geared towards just kind of helping you start on the right track. So I'm going to talk about, as a pen tester, what I do from the client kickoff call all the way basically to reporting. So feel free to ask me questions as we go. Standard non-disclosure there. Pause the video and read it if you're interested. So there's a few things that happen before we start digging in and really hacking away at web apps. We have a client kickoff call. This is basically where the client tells us what we're looking at, and we talk about our limits. Typically we don't perform denial of service or anything like that on the host. That's pretty standard. The rules of engagement document. This is where we define the limits as far as, okay, when can we test? Do you want us to do the heavier, noisier, automated scanning after hours and manual scanning 24/7? Just let us know what works best for you. And then, of course, we talk about the scope, which is, the URL, whatever the application is, where it's located. And then, in case all hell breaks loose, we have the point of contacts. That way, if it stops responding or something's gone bad, or even if we just have a question, we know who that we need to contact. So the first thing I want to mention is evidence gathering. I know when I first started pen testing and I was going through, there were things that I found, and then when it came time to write the report, a lot of cussing because I didn't take screenshots, or I didn't document the get and post requests and then the response, or whatever it was. I didn't write down or record the needed evidence, and so that made the report writing very hard and even delayed sometimes, because I actually had to go back and do part of the assessment again so that I could tell the client how I broke their stuff. So the more you collect, you can never collect too much evidence. If you don't need it, just don't use it, but make sure that it's there in case you do. Okay, what do I use for evidence gathering? I like to use KeepNote and Kali. It's also available for Windows and Mac OS. And if you're not familiar with it, it's pretty easy to use. You just make new pages. You can throw in links or scripts or screenshots, whatever you want to, and it's just a super easy report. And then if you've got to share the information, you can export it as HTML pages automatically if the client wants all of your raw notes. A way that I'll do things is I'll usually group them together by vulnerability. You can see a couple. It kind of depends on the size of the assessment. So if I have several hosts, several different web apps, I'll group them by that. Or if it's just one or two web apps, then I'll usually just group it by vulnerability. And as you can see, I have it color coded. So the more severe, like your criticals, I have those as the dark red, and then serious would be red, and so on. The green, those are quick reference for me to know that those are pages with just basic information, what my credentials are for the application during the assessment, things like that. There's so many different ways. It's just kind of personal preference. It took me a while to sort of figure out what way works best for me. So you're probably going to go through that too. If it's something that you haven't gone through already, you'll probably change how you organize your information several times. What all do you record? Well, it's a web app, so you want to make sure that anything you're sending to the application, all of the HTTP requests, you want to document those. And you also want to document the response. That way the client can see what payloads, if you want to call it, that you sent, what strings you sent to the application to break it, so that they can go back and replicate this themselves for the devs. That way they can see, they can break it on their own, and then when they remediate it, they can test it themselves and see if it is in fact remediated. Anytime that you create additional accounts or anything like that too, you want to make sure that if you're not able to delete those yourself at the end of the assessment, just make sure to let the client know so that they can get rid of that extra data. And then a big important thing I've seen consultants screw up with this, where they actually post some big hacks that they've made online. Not cool. It's probably against your disclosure agreement as well. So don't do that. So when you're getting your screenshots, make sure that it's legible. Make sure that when you put this in the report, is it going to be something that the client can read? Or when you shrink it down to fit it on the page, is it going to be so small that they can't tell what it is? Just make sure that you consider those things when you're collecting your evidence. So for example, this particular screenshot was of a pretty big SQL database dump that I did, and there were so many columns that it was a gigantic image. And so basically what I did was trimmed it down and got what I thought was some of the more sensitive information and put that in there. But again, it was just pages and pages. So sometimes you will have to do some image editing, some basic image editing, to get these to fit correctly in the report. But I'm sure we all know basic image editing, hopefully. If not, Google, that helps. So, and then I talked about HTTP requests and responses. So whenever you're documenting the request, you don't want the client to have to sit there and scrape through a single request to see, okay, what the hell broke my code, what did you actually send? So a way to help them out, as you can see, just highlight the whatever it was that you broke the site with. So in this particular case, you can see I highlighted just a basic SQL injection, just testing for SQL injection vulnerability. So and you can see how I have the code in the gray box. That way when they're going through and see it, the code is all grouped together instead of looking like all the other text, because that would get messy and hard to read otherwise. So the previous page, you can see, was the user ID parameter that was vulnerable to SQL injection. You want to make sure that you're testing all parameters on that page, and you want to document every single parameter that is vulnerable. Don't just document one. Document everything that's vulnerable, so that the client knows exactly what needs to be fixed. So, but when you're reporting, you only need to show like one example, and then you can do a table row, like with the parameter name, and then the URLs that vulnerable parameter was found on. So, if that didn't make sense, hopefully it did. Come see me afterwards, and I'll show you some examples. Methodologies, make sure you're going by standard methodologies such as OWASP. I kind of see these as a good guideline, almost like a checklist if you want to call it that, just to make sure that I'm providing a thorough assessment every time. Because after you start to do them for a while, you might get used to doing certain things and get a little more lax than what you should and forget things. So having a methodology to go by is a great thing. I'm not saying only stick to that methodology, because there's going to be certain things to test for that might not be in it, but I'm just saying use that as kind of a general guideline to make sure that you're not forgetting something. Okay, so before I start really digging into the application, one of the first things I do is try to utilize open source intelligence gathering, and I'll go and try and see how big the footprint is for the website. So let's say if it's a bank, for example, I'll go and I'll search for development forums, old email archives, it's anything that I can find where I'm getting results from employee email addresses or from the company name. And there have been several times where I've gone by doing this, and this is very time consuming. It's not something you can just breeze through and expect good results. You need to make sure that you're devoting some time to this and really digging in, because there have been several times where I've actually found entire database schemas and information that developers posted on development help forums. And they were a little bit older, and so they were archived, and it didn't require authentication to that group. But the information was still relevant, and it helped me leverage attacks. So, just look for that. And if social engineering is involved as well, then you can find out names of guys that are in the development department, or, the devs in the company, or any other information like that. So make sure that you really dig in to this. I also have found leaked credentials for a client that had already been hacked and wasn't aware. We helped them figure that out because they had leaked credentials online. Not a good thing at all, but it's something that we were able to provide to them as a service just by being diligent through the open source intelligence. So as mentioned, found database types, schemas, test credentials, and help forums, everything that was still valid. So if you're a dev and you are getting help online for an issue that you're running into with your code or something, you're trying to get some help debugging it, or GitHub or something like that, if you post it on there, make sure you sanitize it. Just change the names. As if you have the name of your columns or something like that, just change it just enough where when someone is doing something like what I do and they find this, it doesn't matter because it's been sanitized and it's not relevant, but it's still close enough where you can get the assistance that you need. And if you give someone temporary access to help you out and debug something, make sure you turn it off when they're done and don't just forget about it, because we'll get in that way too. Some other tools that I use for this, I like Discover by Lee Baird. It's just a quick and dirty tool that will go and do searches for a domain, for names of people. It has some good parsers on it as well. You can also see, if you need it, it can help crack Wi-Fi and parse XML files. There's quite a few things that it does, so it's a pretty handy tool. I recommend that. Automated scanning. Okay, you're supposed to be a hacker. Why are you using automated scanners? Well, yeah, super lazy. No, with the amount of time that we have when we do these assessments, it's usually a couple of weeks. And so the great thing about automated scanning is that they find a lot of low-hanging fruit really quick. So it covers a lot of ground, saves a lot of time. But don't just rely on those, because a vulnerability scan is not a pen test. It's just a vulnerability scan. So don't just rely on that. So yeah, again, a vuln scan is not a pen test. To those who say it is, there you go. So to talk a little more about automated scanning, you still want to make sure that you validate their findings. So if it says that there's cross-site scripting on several pages, don't just go document that. Replay that. See if you can take that further. Instead of the super lame pop-up of 1 or XSS, throw something else in there. Can you do remote file inclusion? Can you bring in some sort of JavaScript that's a keylogger or something? So many of those tools are out there, and just really dig in and take time to see how far you can take that cross-site scripting attack? Is it client side? Is it stored? Just check that out, and don't just rely on the automated scanner. Just go do the manual verification, and if it's there, again, then document it and make sure you're included on your report. If it's not there, then you can just ignore it and tell the scanner that it's stupid. They like that. Nessus, that's another good one. This looks at the host pretty well and quickly. So again, this is just do a few checks when we start to see are there any glaring holes that we can go after, right away. IBM App Scan is a really good one. And that's pretty extensive. That looks at the app pretty extensive. But again, you still need to verify the results. Okay, automated scanning, Burp Suite Pro, you're going to hear me talk about this quite a bit. I love this, this program. So it has a built-in automated scanner, active scanner, spidering, several other add-ons that you can get, especially in the Pro version. NIC2 is also good for finding, admin pages or known CGI vulnerabilities or default pages, things like that. This is open source too, by the way. It's also NIC2 is also built into Nessus, but if you enable that, I'm going to warn you, it adds a hell of a lot of time to your Nessus scan. So usually what I do is I'll let Nessus finish, and then I'll go and put that application through NIC2 and do separate tools in a row instead of everything at once. Because you don't want to flood it, you don't want to flood yourself and where you're just waiting forever for your stuff to finish. WP Scan, this is for WordPress framework site. There are also other tools, and a lot of them come in Kali already for like Drupal and Joomla and other framework scanners, just popular scanners that will go through, and they're specifically for those frameworks to look for known vulnerabilities. So, for example, WP Scan, it would point out if it's an outdated version. So that's something that you would want to report to the client, that they need to stay on top of updates. If they have the old timthumb.php script that was vulnerable to several attacks, it will tell you what themes they're using. That way, if that theme has known exploits, you can try to leverage those. And you can also enumerate the usernames. Extremely easy for WordPress. OWASP Durbuster, this is a good tool. It takes a bit of time, but it's good for finding hidden directories that weren't found during the spidering phase. So this is good to let it run. If you have an application that's pretty solid and you're just trying to find anything else, anything extra to leverage, this is a good tool. You can do brute forcing through it, or you can feed several lists that actually come with the application already of known directory names. Are there any questions so far? I feel like I'm going through this really fast. Yes, Adrian.
How do you feel about Derby?
Derby?
Yeah.
Con?
Well, no, Derby as it's Durbuster, but basically it's like Durbuster, but it's command line.
The command line version of this?
Yes. It's called Derby. It's very similar to this.
All I really do to launch Durbuster is I just type Durbuster in command line. I've never tried the interface of it because I like the simplicity of just point and click of the interface. But I'll have to give it a shot. Are there performance?
Well, it seems relatively fast, and it's usually a little easier to get up and running. And some of the default libraries of file names and paths and tries are really good.
Are they in there by default, or do you have to
specify? Yes, they're in there by default.
They are? Okay.
And they also come along with a bigger one, but the default one in and of itself is usually pretty good.
Mm-hmm. That same with this one. The default ones for this one are really good too. They're pretty big actually. You can do. It even comes with a list where it has capitalized first letter, or capitalized names, and a version where it's all lowercase too. So that comes in handy. Yep.
I think in the latest version of Kali, Dirtbuster has been deprecated.
Okay.
Wasp has moved that over to Zap.
Oh, they put it inside Zap? Okay, cool.
oh.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I haven't upgraded yet, so yeah, I got a lot more to deal with. I'm sure you can probably just throw the old one on there too.
It also
So.
has memory issues as well, so.
Do-
Yeah, farsighted.
Oh, nice. That sounds very convenient.
On Dirtbuster, do you have preferred settings as far as number of threads and whether or not you go into how recursive, going into each folder and so forth?
Yeah, it just kind of depends. Get a feel for the app. If it's a super slow server, obviously you want to lower the throttle, things like that. But if it's just a tool that I'm running right away, I'll just let it go and see if it finds anything. And usually you can tell pretty quick if you're just wasting your time or not.
In your observation, it seems that a lot of IDSs detect things like normal Metasploit attacks and so forth, but for some reason they don't alert on a shit ton of 404s happening back to back or 500 errors, which this will always generate a ton of 500 errors and 404 errors, but it usually gets passed. So I'm not sure why most people don't have something in place in the IDS to detect that.
Yeah, now there have been instances on particular applications where I've let this run for a little while, and then all of a sudden it will stop itself because it just errors out. And I don't exactly remember what IPS or IDS or whatever it was that they were using, but it actually blocked my traffic for a period of time, and I had to wait and start it again. So then eventually I had to throttle it down so low that it wasn't really helping me out at all. So then I moved on to something else. So.
Mod security.
Yeah, I think that's actually what I think it was, mod security, because there's so many requests that it cut it out, and then where this got so many errors, it just stopped itself.
It's
So,
anti-DOS strategy.
yeah.
Could you give a quick explanation as to what mod security is?
That is specifically for PHP, and is that correct?
For Apache.
Apache, that's what I mean. Apache, I'm sorry. And it's basically where you can go and modify the security for things like denial of service mitigation, and probably someone that's a little more technically minded than me could explain it a little bit better, but I guess that's the super high level explanation of it. Anybody else want to add on to that?
Yeah, it's basically a WAF that sits in the Apache layer and comes with some standard signatures, and there are other signature databases you can add for specific purposes. There's one for WordPress, there's one for PHP in general, and basically will either block traffic on error or modify the return so it can give 404s and 403s with reference IIS if you wanted to. So it can be wonderful in this way.
Yeah, I've heard it's kind of a pain in the.
Only for lazy developers.
Okay.
I've been using it for years.
And it's pretty fast.
Well, what's by definition of pain in the ass? The other thing that's really useful for is you can log the contents of post requests, which means if you end up doing post forensics, and if you have post forensics issues, you can actually see the payload on post requests as well as get requests.
Oh, that's cool.
Incredibly useful.
Yeah, that sounds really handy.
Irritates the shit out of auditors because now I've got full pan in my logs. But
Cool, thanks. Any more questions? Cool. So then again, for automated scanning, there's quite a few that come installed in Kali already, and there's several open source options. And you can see that this is probably outdated now since there's a new version of Kali. But in the old one, this was accurate. So I need to update this after I upgrade eventually.
It's too slow.
Too slow? Yeah.
Don't update.
I've heard a lot of issues about it. That's why I haven't done it yet. So a few tips for automated scanning. Don't just put in the URL and click run. That's going to cause problems, probably. And you don't want to find out. You get a pissed off client calling you at 2 or 3 a.m. asking why stuff is broken and it's because you flooded the host or you have safe checks turned off or whatever it is. So make sure that when you are using an automated scanner that you know what it is that it's doing. Look at the settings. Again, as I mentioned, you don't want to flood the host, so you need to throttle it down. You need to check the performance and see initially, is it flooding it? Is it just making it so slow? Or are you getting timeouts? Just things to pay attention to. During the kickoff call, the client usually will ask, are there any pages or functions that you want us to avoid? If it's like a contact form, you don't want your automated scanner submitting, thousands of emails through their contact form and really having given somebody a bad day. So make sure you ask that. And then if there are things that they want you to avoid, make sure that you specify those in the automated scanner. Just be diligent and take a lot of notes. That way you can go back and reference each page and make sure that you're not just irritating the client. Some issues that I've found are like page not found. They all come back as 200 OK. So if you're doing spidering or something, then you have a gigantic list of your entire dictionary from your scanner showing as legitimate pages for the application, which is terrible to sort through. So go through and specify those error 404 pages, and if you need to put in a specific error 200, with the correct size and everything, that way it knows it's not really a page. Take the time to do that. Configuring the login process. So if it's an application that requires authentication, you want to look at it as an unauthenticated user, and then you also want to go back and look at it as an authenticated user, which you also want to ask, are there different levels of authentication? Or is there admin level and then standard user, or is everyone the same level when they log in? So those are things you want to ask for and things that you want to configure in the scanner as well. And then, as I mentioned before, you have to take time to verify the results to weed out any false positives. And then when you're ready, you can let it go. Again, as I mentioned, with automated scanners, once it's done, if it's legitimate, document it, see how you can leverage that. Don't just document it and move on. Really dig into it to see if maybe you can chain a few things together and leverage your attack that way. The example, if it says there's SQL injection, try SQL injection, exploit it, see if you can dump the database, see if you can get a shell on that host.
Have there been any websites that have been specifically created for just people trying to test out their web app pen testing skills?
Oh yeah, there's tons. That's a good question. So the vulnerable web apps, I think that's the name of it, and there's several that you can download. I know OWASP even has a few that they're virtual machines. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so he has a huge list of these vulnerable web apps. Yeah. Cool.
Mutilidae, now developed by Jeremy Druin.
Nice little commercial there, Adrian. Thanks. So yeah, and that's a great question. Those are things that, if you get a new tool, let's say that you are familiar with testing web apps, but a new tool is out. You want to test that in your lab. You don't want to start using that tool for the first time and testing it out on a client, on a production environment application, or just make sure that you try it at home. That way, if it really sucks, then you don't have to find out that it sucks with the client being pissed off about something. Burp Suite Pro, I told you I was going to talk about that a lot. Make sure you manually look at each page, see what's going on. Any parameter that you find, you want to hit those and see if they're vulnerable to, again, things like SQL injection or cross-site scripting or anything. Just make sure that they are filtering things very well for all parameters. Not just a couple, but make sure that you're doing a thorough job and testing all parameters.
Do you like OWASP Zap as well?
You know, I don't. I know that some people like to use multiple, go back and forth. It's a good program, but I think I'm just so familiar with Burp Suite Pro and that it's just kind of hard to stop and figure out something else when you already have something that does that for you. So, but I have a lot of friends and other pen testers that they love OWASP Zap. I've just never really taken the time to dig into it a whole lot. Things to look for. So, look at the server response. See what it's running. Is it running Apache? Is it running IIS? Most of the time they'll tell you. Sometimes they'll tell you a little too much, exact versions and things, and you can use that to leverage your attack and see if there are even any exploits out there, known exploits. Just a few list of things. I don't know if you're taking notes, if you want to watch this later, but a few things to make sure that you're looking for, testing for in every application, like cross-site scripting, SQL and LDAP injection, local and remote file inclusions, cross-site request forgery. Those are all pretty powerful attacks. You can do some damage with those, and obviously your client wants to know if that's something that they're vulnerable to. Xenotix by OWASP. Has anybody used that on Windows? It's a pretty cool little tool. You kind of have to babysit it a little bit, but it shows it emulates it through 3 different browser types, and you put in the URL and you can specify different parameters, but it will go through a list and it will load the page in all 3 browsers, then it waits a little bit, and then it goes to the next one and loads it. So it makes it look like real traffic's being sent through. It's not super fast. So you can sit there, and if something pops, if you get cross-site scripting, you can pause it and copy that request and then go try and take it further. So it's pretty cool. Last time I checked, they only had it for Windows, but it's useful. I've found cross-site scripting with that other things and some of my manual testing didn't get it to go.
Well, I'm not raising my hand. Just chilling.
All right, cool. With your hands raised for a second?
Yeah.
A few things to look for as well in the URL. Are they passing potentially sensitive information through GET requests instead of POST? So do they have the username or the password or the session ID or anything that could be used later on? Maybe that page is being stored, is being cached locally, and so if your browser gets exposed to something, if someone gets into your history and stuff and that's cached, are they going to have your username or password or whatever it is? So you want to see, you're going to look and see what's being passed through the GET requests. Look for comments in the source code. I've actually found some pretty good information through developer comments where they talk to each other or where they fix something and left the old information in there and references. And I have found database names, I've found internal IPs, usernames, and other information that definitely should not be in source code comments. And again, it's time consuming, but it really pays off.
When you're using Durbust and so forth, are you going through and saying, try this extension for everything else that you find, like back and .text, for people who took the old source code and just made a text version of it, or made a backup version of it to keep the old version, but then still kept the new version there?
Yeah, and that's a good point too, is because I have found I've found old like SQL files, like .zip files and .bak files of like PHP config. And other things. So the Durbuster, it will go through, and a lot of the other tools will do this too, but they'll go through and look for common, like index.bak, index.php.bak, and so on, because a lot of times people do leave those backup files on there because they think, well, it's on the server, it's not connected, and it's basically an unusable file because the extension has been changed. But what they don't realize is those things can still be indexed by Google, or they can be found through lists, and especially when it's a config file that has your database info, your database config, like the username and password, that's not a good thing. Now to prevent some death by PowerPoint. There's a happy dog with a hot dog. Aww. Oh. That's why he's so happy. Come on, Adrian. A few things to look for as well. Authentication, can it be bypassed? Again, a few things that I found before are security by obscurity. So by going through and looking at the source file, they will actually have the link to admin pages in there, but they're not showing it through because of a JavaScript that from your login level, it prevents the admin page from or the admin link from showing. All you have to do is look at the source code, and then you go to the link, and now I'm at a settings page, and that's happened quite a bit. So security through obscurity is not a good practice, and that's something you can help find just by digging in and looking at comments and source code. And there also been a couple months ago an assessment that I was doing. I was able to go through and find, it was the security by obscurity deal, and I was able to go through and construct a URL that sent me straight to a server status page, and I crafted, and they basically told me how to do this in their source code, where I was sending commands to their server as a standard web user, and sent it to the client saying, hey, I just got a response from this. My next command, if you're okay with it, is to restart the server. And of course they said, no, don't, it's production. But it was a good enough proof of concept. And again, if you don't take the time to find these things for your client, who's going to find it for them that they don't want, So just check those things out. Session, after you log off, is the session ID still good? Can you paste that somewhere else and still use it, or is it no longer good? Can you have multiple sessions as the same user at the same time? Some people argue that's not really a vulnerability, but I would argue saying that it depends on the application. So if, for example, if it's something sensitive, we'll say a bank website, if I log on, I want it to automatically kill a session if somebody else is logged on, whether it's a malicious user or whatever. I think it's just good practice, especially if you're doing money transactions or something. It seems like there could be the potential for some miscommunication between you and whoever else has your login. So that's why I like to argue multiple sessions at a time. That's kind of use case. So talk to the client. If you do see that that's possible, just talk to the client and say, hey, is this a big deal? Why does this not matter for your website, and so on. Password requirements. So many passwords. They'll give me some crazy password to use for the test, and I'll go and change it to ABC123 right away. And then I'll change the password again to ABC123 because they allow you to use old passwords over and over with low requirements. And that's an issue because, those things are much easier to brute force and so on. Starting to get kind of low on time, so I'll just go through this stuff a little faster. Admin portals, you don't want public access to admin panels. That's not good for obvious reasons. Tests and default credentials, look up default accounts. So if they have Tomcat available, look up default creds for Tomcat. Directory browsing, I found some really interesting information just because directory browsing was enabled, and including like a full list of all internal employee ID pictures that they used for their badges. So that was a good find. and text files with company information in it, all because directory browsing was enabled. Again, look for dangerous HTTP methods. Quite often I'm able to get shell on a server just because put method was enabled. So I put my own code. Laudanum scripts are pretty good for that. So check those out. And then are they vulnerable to things like directory traversal, shell shock, heartbleed, etc. You want to look and see what their SSL TLS settings are. We all know that SSL TLS is not really the greatest anymore. There's a lot of issues, but there are recommended settings. So check that out. Do your research and see what the latest recommendation is for what ciphers you should be supporting, whether it's TLS 1.1, and so on. And then, as I mentioned, just check out Methodologies. They will help you if there's an area you're not familiar with, like if you're not really sure how to check for, let's say, cross-site request forgery or cross-site scripting, something like that. The methodology will help you figure out what it is you're supposed to look for, and then you can go look up these things and practice in your lab. Don't ever practice on a client or in a client environment. And then, when you're ready to go hack some websites. And that's basically it for the slides. I know I've got some time left. If you guys have some more questions or anything, I know it's quite a bit of information. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody, even afterwards.
When you're contracting for web app pen tests, are you ever concerned about your source IP address leaking in there? And if so, how are you protecting that?
No, usually because of time constraints, we will give them, like, this is the IP the traffic is coming from, and we ask them to whitelist us. That way we don't have to try and get through their IDS, IPS, because that's daunting. It takes a lot of time, unless it's a very special case where they want us to, like incident response or something like that. But that's rare because I guess sort of in the industry, things happen so quick that we ask them, hey, can you just basically remove these steps for us for time's sake? And that way, when we run automated scanners and things like that, we're not being blocked, and we can just, we can get through the assessment and try and see the application as accurate as possible, as if we were in their building. So that was a good question. Anybody else?
As far as automated scanners are concerned, I mean, I've used NetSparker and Acunetics and so forth, but they all seem to not even be as good and usable as Burp Suite's automated scanning functionality. Is there anything you'd recommend as far as good automated commercial scanners? Or
Yeah, IBM AppScan is pretty good. I like that one. Of course, you can tell different automated scanners, they all kind of have their strengths and weaknesses. So that's why I like to use a few different ones. But the one that I've had the best luck with so far as how in-depth it goes, is IBM AppScan. So, and I'm sure there are others out there that are equivalent. And I used to use Acunetics as well, but it, I had issues with it flooding the host and just
I have a problem running it on
inaccurate.
multiple hosts and having even freaking run, and the responsiveness while it's running, even on a system with good
Yeah,
good resources,
it's a hog. And then I also don't like the way that it sorts out the request and response, how you have to sort of dig through, and it's not really easy to copy and try and replay those attacks. So I guess it's just kind of personal preference, but just try different ones, because you'll see some different results depending on what automated scanner you do use.
Yeah, I really like Burp because it shows you this is why we think this particular vulnerability exists here.
Yeah.
And you can look at the attack and then try to do it yourself manually.
Yeah, and another great thing about Burp Suite Pro is that it's actively developed, and so there are great plugins that you can add on Burp Suite Pro. I'm not sure if you can do that on the free version, but I know the Pro version, they have so many excellent add-ins. So like a WSDL, I think WSDL Wizard is one. So you can plug in WSDL address, or they have some that clean up JavaScript to help make it much easier to read. They have some that will take, if it's like ASP, it's like all that garbage it will decode and just clean it up for you. There's so many things in there that help save time. There's also a plugin too, which is cool, where it will if you have a parameter that you think might be vulnerable to SQL injection, you can take that and just click a button, and it will put it through the SQL map plugin through Burp and automatically start running for you. So you're not having to, take that post and everything, make a file, open SQL map, point the file in, and do all that. It just does it for you and saves quite a bit of time. So check that out.
Are there any web development languages you see and you're like instantly as a pen tester, ooh, awesome, happy? Like Cold Fusion and PHP are my two happy points.
Mm-hmm.
ASP.NET generally is not as easy, but is there any trends you see as far as development languages that there's some languages that lend themselves to screwing up?
Yeah.
And other ones that don't.
My favorite are when they use like the open source or the big frameworks, like I mentioned, WordPress or Drupal or Joomla. And then my second would be like Cold Fusion, because that is Cold Fusion, and then PHP.
Yeah, there's a good CMS scanner out there. I'm trying to figure what it's called now. That for Joomla and all those other ones. But even then, the Joomla code itself, my understanding, is probably pretty good. But all those plugins for all the different content management systems, that's where people
Oh yeah,
have a
and
tendency to get screwed
they're
up.
outdated, or they don't check the validity of a plugin before they throw it in there, and so it's a mess.
I mean, I was trying to build a Drupal site.
There are ways to harden. So I know for me personally, a few websites that I have, I do use WordPress, and I think it's kind of a way for me to challenge. It's almost like a, I don't know why I do. I think I'm a glutton for punishment or whatever. But from doing that, I've forced myself to learn ways to harden it, and I'll do assessments against myself, against those sites regularly to keep hardening those. I think it's just a weird game I like to play, where I can see if I can actually take something like WordPress and make it secure.
That's okay. We won't kink shame you.
Yeah, thanks. But I haven't had any issues, and you can harden those if you know what we're doing. But most people, if they're building a website on something like that, it's because they need something quick and dirty, and they usually aren't going to take the time to harden it. So.
Well, I mean, by the time I'd actually tried to finish hardening my Drupal 7 install, Drupal 8 beta had come out, and I'm like, well, fuck. Because Drupal transitioning between different Drupal versions isn't pretty. So you stick with one version, and then you do a pretty big upgrade, and it's like, well, I will have to pretty much rebuild my site now.
Yeah, you don't really have much control on, what changes between upgrades too.
Say one thing in regards to like some of the favorite languages, that I think it's important to specify the difference between like server side versus client side exploits, because
Yeah.
Some of the ones that I've absolutely loved watching the development of, and some of the very huge mistakes that developers make in them are this mistake that I don't have to worry about client side code or what I send back, because when it executes, it's not going to impact me. So this like Node, like pretty much like Node and some of these newer is very heavy reliance on like client-side JavaScript code, and anything that uses like portlets or anything that loads into it as like an extension of the browser or something along those lines. Those are
Awesome.
in my opinion, like very, very important, because I've seen a lot of them lately that they will send over an entire user table in like JSON. Like,
Yeah.
And the web app filters it out, and you're like, wow, you gave me every
Yep.
UID and email address for the entire database.
I never understood Node.js. I mean, JavaScript is sort of a cancer as it is, and it's like, hey, let's extend it to the
Let's not go
server
there.
side.
You're cut off.
Yeah, I think we still have a few more minutes, right?
If we have legitimate questions.
Yeah.
Just wanted to mention that .NET frameworks, a lot of them will pass the entire database user object with every session call. So
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Make sure when you do your manual testing, make sure you're going through and looking at at the code, the responses, and everything, because you'll find some good stuff.
Yeah, pretty much
So.
anything that uses a RESTful API now is, I just sit there in dev mode and just watch all the requests, and it's pretty amazing some of the stuff you'll find.
Yeah, it's kind of sad.
So two things. First is that you came onto the subject of things to look out for. As GraphQL is growing in stature and becoming more and more common, GraphQL is Facebook's new method of interrogating REST APIs,
Okay.
where they actually get JavaScript on the browser to set what query is and what fields they want. And there's meant to be an ACL on the server side, which actually specifies, what are acceptable and non-acceptable things. But that's going to be a bloodbath when that becomes more common. Because you'll just locally edit the DOM, add more fields.
Yeah, and send it back. That sounds like a actually pretty fun assessment, so I'm excited about that.
I'll be happy to show you GraphQL. It's awesome in its stupidity. The other one is...
That's what the world needs more of.
Yes. The other thing is stuff that makes me deliriously happy is finding Java, because in my experience, I think that maybe only 3 or 4% of Java application servers will actually be deployed properly, because especially with things like at one point differentiation between Red Hat, JBoss, and Tomcat. One of the main differentiations was that JBoss, the commercial version, was actually locked down, which meant to actually secure Tomcat meant ending 16 or 17 files, following all of those, because it's a mess inside if you don't understand how it works.
Yeah.
And finding those endpoints where you can just deploy new laws, it's
Yeah, we're actually, that's a pretty common thing even today, especially when we're doing internal assessments. So we've actually compromised quite a few hosts just from uploading, a war file. So those are fun to find. It's like a free gift. Any, yeah.
There's actually just recently created by Mozilla to my hackers office. I don't see this model of CMP content sheet protection of restriction that are going to be implemented server side now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really kind of a testament with the all methodology team of how we implement hackers. What they decided to do is take XSS because they have that content utilize JavaScript and style protections. We're going to explicitly declare what is not allowed on the server, so you probably already these attacks have been mistake. Instead of looking at it and saying, oh, basically all it is what pen testers will and can't do.
Yeah.
So now we know everything you can't do.
Yeah, that's nice too. It's like the robot.txt file for your assessment.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
how robust it is to
Yeah.
start looking for that.
Cool. Thanks. I think that's it on time. If you guys have more questions or anything, I'll be outside. Let's talk some more. So thanks, guys.